Hey everyone, welcome to the Y Blast from Single Purpose Ministries. My name is Ed Thompson. Our passion with SPM, Single Purpose, is to help people with their relationships, primarily with God through Jesus Christ, with one another, and then within ourselves. These are things we have taken and looked at more deeply. And today we are going to look at it from another angle. I'll be with you on that in just a second. But the first thing I want to mention is welcome to Easter week. As many of you know, the church calendar, Good Friday is the day, this coming Friday, on the calendar where Jesus was crucified. And then Sunday is the day of the resurrection. To some of you folks who may not be acquainted or familiar with Christianity in itself, I welcome you and thank you for coming, and just ask that you sit with us on this and know that we're coming from a place where we want you to have the best that God can give you. And I'm not about to determine exactly what that is. So stick with us. Here we go. We're going to talk about relationships. And here's the first one, just to set everything going this morning. I'm related to a Child Evangelism Fellowship ministry in Greensboro that goes to different venues to see children, elementary age, and to hear them, for them to hear us talk about their spiritual needs. It has been a wonderful thing as I selected to do this during the pandemic, and it's really gotten me to a place where I'm so glad I'm affiliated with them and the team that I get to accompany every Thursday at a YMCA. Last Thursday, the children come in, but before they got there, we hid Easter eggs outside on a beautiful day. The kids couldn't wait. They got out there. Easter eggs were plastic and full of candy, and there they went. As I was just kind of guarding the area, a little boy came up to me, 6 years old, and said, "Mr. Ed, did that hurt when Jesus got those nails in his hands?" I said, "Oh, I'm sure it was just terrible pain." And then he looked up at me and he thought for a moment and said, "Did he cry?" And that really took me to a place of, this little boy wants to know some spiritual answers to some very good questions. So I did my best to explain on the run, because he had his eye out for another egg that he'd spotted. But I said, "I'd love to talk with you more about it." But yes, he did. He cried. Well, as that afternoon went on, and we went back inside and we heard some good Bible teaching from one of the teachers, I thought to myself, he really did cry. In fact, according to this wonderful chart in my trusty Bible, there's a place in here that says he said 7 things from the cross, and they were the last words that he ever said. But he cried them out, and he cried in pain. And I'm going to take you on a little journey quickly through these 7 last words on a morning in Jerusalem over 2,000 years ago, that's on the Christian calendar, that says on a hill outside of Jerusalem, the King of Kings was crucified. Along with him were 2 criminals. So let's go ahead and let me start by reading number 1 and number 2 in terms of what he said. I go to number 1, and it says, and boy, this is a blockbuster. Here he is on the cross, and he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And who are they? Well, they were the Jewish leaders, the Roman soldiers, bystanders. His family was there watching, or at least his mother and 1 disciple and some other ladies. But it says here, because we are all sinners, we all played a part in putting Jesus to death. The good news is that God is gracious. He will forgive us and give us new life through his Son. So the first thing he was saying that morning is, Father, forgive them. Now, Luke 23, verse 43, another saying. Set it up quickly. Two criminals. One was watching closely at Jesus' behavior, handling things in excruciating pain. And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. To which Jesus replied, I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise. It says here that the dying criminal had more faith than the rest of Jesus' followers put together, at least on that day. Although the disciples continued to love Jesus, their hopes for the kingdom were shattered on that day. Most of them had gone into hiding, and even a couple of them a few days later said, we had hoped he was the Messiah who had come to rescue Israel. By contrast, the criminal looked at the man who was dying next to him and said, remember me. By all appearances, the kingdom was finished. Listen to this. How awe-inspiring is the faith of this man who alone saw beyond the present shame to the coming glory. I love that. In my life, I was always hung up on the present shame or the here and now. And then one day, I was able to see the coming glory. And I live to see more of that. I hope you will too. Folks, we go to number 3. What did he say next? Well, in John 19, and it's verse 27, he became really close with his family. And he told his mother, dear woman, here is your son. And of course, John of the Gospel of John, and his number one man in many ways, he said to John, here is your mother. And from then on, this disciple took her into his home. How great it was that Jesus was looking after his own family as he was ready to die. Saying number 4, Matthew 27. And I know I'm hopping all around. The 45th verse and the 46th, another blockbuster, but they all are because Jesus never wasted a word. At noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice, my God, why have you abandoned me? Why have you forsaken me? And it says down below in the notes that the physical agony was horrible, and even worse was the spiritual separation from God. Jesus suffered this double death so that we would never have to experience eternal separation from God. Now, I'm not going to try to rewrite this commentary, but let me add one more and make it a triple death. When Jesus died on that hill, Calvary, that day, he took on every sin of every person in every century who ever lived. Imagine taking on the sin of the world and then your Father forsaking you. Oh yes, it was excruciatingly painful, as I told that little boy. But really, taking on the sin of the world, think about it. Just your sin and mine. So, as we think about that, we're going to move over to 5 and 6. This is where Jesus in John 19:28 says this, I am thirsty. Of course he was. He was still living in that human body. He was still suffering, as we've said. But he was also fulfilling Psalms as to why he said that. And so there may not be as much depth without closer study, but they did put a hyssop plant with vinegar on it, and he tasted it. And here's where he said, number 6, it is finished. What is finished? Well, it's the same as him saying it's paid in full. I finished God's work of salvation by paying the full penalty for the sins of the world. With his death, the complex sacrificial system ended because Jesus took all sin upon himself. Folks, think about it. There's no more sacrificial system because the sacrificial lamb, once for all, sacrificed for us. Getting close to preaching a little bit. Finally, that's the sixth, and seventh is coming now. Luke 23:46. I'm sure you've heard this one before. And the neat part is I just took Scripture to comment on Scripture on this seventh and final word. It's getting close to 3 p.m. there that day. And Jesus says, Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands. And with those words, he breathed his last. Listen to the final the final scripture down here. When the Roman officer overseeing the execution saw what had happened, he worshiped God and said, surely this man was innocent. And when all the crowd that came to see the crucifixion saw what happened, they went home in deep sorrow. But Jesus' friends, including the woman who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching. There's a lot in that. And I will just say, where would you have been that day? I think of that for myself. So on this day, in that century, 20 centuries ago, perhaps 21, I haven't counted, this actually took place. And guess what? I never got to the best news yet, because on Easter morning, when you wake up, you can read the resurrection story. I may just do it next week. It's worthy. Of course it is. But that's the two sides of the week we are currently moving into. And since I've gone over a little bit, I'm not going to keep you much longer, but to thank you for coming once again, to wish you a happy Resurrection Day, and to let you know that I'm going to even share next week of how I'm overcoming a relationship with myself that's getting healthier because I've got a lot of good help. I'll explain next week. I love you all. Happy Easter week. God bless. See ya.